Welcome to Hemp Legally Speaking. This is Jonathan Miller, your host. This is Frost Brown Todd's podcast on all things hemp, the laws, the regulations, how to stay out of trouble, how to grow your business, and how to navigate this crazy, still new industry, the hemp and CBD industry. I'm really excited today to be talking with a good friend of mine who I will consider one of the godfathers of the CBD industry. He doesn't have the baggage of the Godfather movies. This is more like the more beneficial Godfather type, but someone who really is responsible, partly responsible for the dramatic growth of the industry. Welcome, Joel Stanley. Joel, how are you doing today?
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Good to see you.
So, Joel, you founded a company called Charlotte's Web. If you could, I think the best way to start this story is to tell the story of Charlotte Fygi, and how you found her and how she inspired what you've been doing for the last decade.
Yeah, Charlotte really was, kind of ground zero for the entire CBD movement. My brothers and I, you know me well, Jonathan. I am one of seven brothers, and we started a cannabis company back in 2008. Back when legalization for medical marijuana was really starting to boom here in Denver, and we really were focused more on the oils, edible types, and we were one of a few groups that were really focused on making cannabis products to where medical marijuana patients could actually know everything that they were taking, whether that was which cannabinoids they were taking and how many milligrams they were getting. This was the early days Wild West, so there wasn't a lot of consistency on the shelf. So we spent from 2008 up until now, really refining that process so that we could make consistent products so people could have repeatable results. And back in those days, it was all THC. No one had really heard of CBD, cannabidiol. And but very early on, we did hear of cannabidiol. Some preliminary research, not a ton of research, but a little bit, showed that it would probably be very beneficial for some of these medical marijuana patients. So we started breeding for it as early as 2009. We started looking for different genetics in the industry that had high levels of CBD, as well as finding even wild hemp. And we were crossing them all to find this end product of a much lower THC cannabis, much higher CBD concentration, which would ultimately be hemp, as you know. And in 2012, we had it was kind of a perfect storm. We had really just come to a certain variety of plant that now actually still goes into the Charlotte's Web product. The same genetics still go into the Charlotte's Web product today. But we had just come to this kind of final plant that had these really high CBD levels, almost unheard of, really low THC levels that really qualified as hemp. But hemp wasn't yet legal in Colorado or the US at this time. It was this big gray area, right? So, but in February 2012, we met Paige Fygi, and Paige is Charlotte's mother. Charlotte was 5 years old at the time, and she was suffering from Dravet syndrome, which is a rare form of epilepsy. And she was seizing, about once every 15 to 30 minutes, a 30-second to even sometimes 5-minute long seizure, life-threatening seizures. So this kind of epilepsy, she's just having these grand mal tonic-clonic, the most violent kind of seizures that you've seen in videos. This was what Charlotte's life was just riddled with. And her parents, Matt and Paige Fygi, had exhausted pharmaceutical options. There was not an FDA-approved drug for Charlotte's disease state or her age at the time. And Paige Fygi found some little bit of research that this little known compound CBD found in some cannabis varieties, research going back to like 1979, 1980, that showed that it could be beneficial for spasmodic seizure disorders. So she talked to her doctors and said, I'd really like to, see if I can find this compound and try it. So Charlotte's doctor supported it. They said, we've tried everything else. So Paige then went on an excursion through the Colorado medical marijuana industry, going dispensary to dispensary and asking about this cannabidiol, CBD. And most people were saying, well, we don't know what that is. A few people knew what it was, but they weren't testing for it. They didn't know if they had any or not. And she was just about to give up when a friend of a friend connected the two of us. They said, hey, you need to meet the Stanleys. They've been working on CBD for some time, kind of quietly, but they may have something for you. So she was introduced to us February 2012. And it was right then, within about a week, that I made the first batch of what we now call Charlotte's Web. And Paige titrated dosing, based on whatever information we could find. How many milligrams of this new CBD are you going to give your 5-year-old daughter, who is seizing all the time? Charlotte was really on the edge of death when I met her. It was painful to watch, but so she gave this oil that we made to Charlotte, and Charlotte went 1 week seizure free. And this hadn't happened, I think, since she was maybe 6 months old.
Wow. And how old is Charlotte by this point?
Well, Charlotte's 5 at this point. Charlotte's 5 at this point. And those results were amazing. I don't think Paige believed them right away. I definitely didn't believe them right away. So she just kept giving it to her and kept experiencing these same results. Word spread through Charlotte's hospice nurse, actually, to another couple of children. One of them, Zakai, would be the second, what we call super responder to CBD. He went at one point about 4 years seizure free, and he was having as many as 200 seizures a day. Wow. So we started to see these results. Word of mouth started to travel through the epilepsy community, and we started to see these results over and over. And it just became very clear that for many of these kids, where nothing previously worked, no pharmaceutical options worked, this CBD was truly working. And this is one of those things where you can see it so clearly in front of your face. Either your child is seizing or they're not. So it was a true phenomenon. And in August 2013, Sanjay Gupta did an expose on cannabis in general, and he highlighted Charlotte's story and the story of my family as a big part of that. And that was really the explosion point for all of CBD. And we had over 500 families move to Colorado because, hemp wasn't yet legalized. This couldn't be shipped across state lines. So we had all these families, we called them medical refugees. This whole community developed right here in Colorado with all of these families. We would have bonfires out at Paige Fygi's house, at Charlotte's house. Those were actually really beautiful days to look back on, but we would have these bonfires, and you'd have these moms and dads with their kids in wheelchairs that are just building this big community all around CBD and all around trying to find something to help their children. So that was really the start of the entire CBD industry. And a lot of people saw the Sanjay Gupta documentaries, but for a lot of people, who didn't see that, they don't know. They just started seeing CBD pop up everywhere, CBD in beverages, CBD in the gas station.
So let's talk about that transition, because you were doing some incredible, extraordinary work for thousands of families that were struggling with disease, but it exploded because there are billions of folks that found other benefits from that. And how did you all navigate that transition?
Simply talking about now, I don't work at Charlotte's Web anymore, something that's very important to mention, but for a good while I was the first CEO of Charlotte's Web and chairman of the board there, we weren't really allowed to talk about Charlotte's story publicly this way because we're asserting a claim. When all it really is my human story. This is just the results that everyone saw and still see today. Fortunately, CBD and all of these cannabinoids, really have greater purpose than just seizure disorders, and even greater purpose than, say, treating any particular disease. What we started to find as the CBD industry grew and as we built Charlotte's Web to this really large company, we started to find that the people purchasing it to try it for seizures versus people purchasing it for everyday anxiety or sleep started to invert. Those numbers started to change. While a lot of people still buy it for the seizure disorders, so many more people are actually using it for anxiety. Number one reason. So these cannabinoids are doing a lot within our body, and the simple fact that we have an endocannabinoid system, which is the largest cell receptor site system throughout our central nervous system. CBD, CBG, THC, all of these cannabinoids do various things to a large system in our body, and so it's no wonder that it can actually help with quite a lot, not just disease states, but general wellness. And so that's a large part of the reason why the CBD industry has exploded. And of course, as you know, the only really federal path you could take it was in this dietary supplement realm, and we're still fighting that battle. And thank you, Jonathan, for continuing to fight the battle up there in Washington, D.C. to get this regulated so that it's clear for the industry that this should be going into all of these different types of products, that it's obviously unbelievably safe. But yeah, I mean, watching the industry go from several thousand families that were using it for seizure disorders to being in every gas station in one form or another, seeing it come out in gummies, seeing it come out in beverages, has been really interesting. And you never want to marginalize its deep impact for someone with a neurological disorder. This may be life-saving for someone, while at the same time you don't want to marginalize the person that just generally feels better or feels less anxious because they're taking it. So it's one of those weird items that fits in categories of highly therapeutic for very specific things, but also highly therapeutic for just general wellness. And not a lot of other products that we've seen in the world, fit all of that range. And I think that's the diversity of cannabinoids in general.
Well, let's talk about your business, about Charlotte's Web. And we've got a lot of folks that listen to this program that have started their own business and would love to have the same kind of success that you all have had, kind of transforming from a brothers organization into a publicly traded company. Can you kind of share the decision making you made behind going public and how you reflect on that experience?
Sure. We went public in August 2018, and that was one of the most difficult decisions that I ever made. It was never our goal. We never set out a goal with Charlotte's Web that was about, let's build up revenue and let's take it public. And it was never really thought about that way. Charlotte's Web started as a mission. We didn't even have enough product. There was not enough milligrams of CBD to take care of all these families that had moved to Colorado back when. So Charlotte's Web was built out of a mission to end a 15,000 person waiting list, most of which was, small children with pediatric epilepsy. So it was really built not with that in mind. And then 2017, 2018, we looked at it and we saw this industry exploding. And in order to build a business the size of Charlotte's Web, you have to take on significant investment. And up until that point, we had only raised $7 million, was all we had raised by the time we had actually hit, I want to say something like around 75 million annual revenue off of just $7 million investment. So there's a lot of just sweat work in there. And in the early days, it was tough to get investment. But as the public markets opened up, we saw an opportunity to raise over $100 million for this this beautiful company, this beautiful brand, this beautiful mission that we started, and we saw an opportunity to raise that money while also keeping effective control of the company for the family. You know, we're the founders and it's our baby. It's very precious to us. And so I'll never regret that decision, but it was a very difficult decision because now all of a sudden you're going to go from small and private and you control everything to being out in front of everyone and having a potential for out there in the future where one day, you know, your baby's going to grow up and be far beyond you. My brother Jared's still an executive there, and I still advise there. Just stepped off the board this year to start this company, but that was a big decision. It was a good decision. I believe it was the right decision, but it was one of the hardest ones that I've ever made just because of how much I care about Charlotte's Web.
Let's talk about the other decision that you hinted at earlier, which is, you know, when you came into this space, you were focused on marijuana. It was legal in Colorado, but it was a federally illegal product. You discovered that these products could be made out of lower THC, and in fact, what became known federally legal as hemp. And if you could kind of share how you, you know, you were able to go from a medical marijuana product to a hemp product, and what that meant for kind of the future of Charlotte's Web and the industry.
Right, that's a fantastic question, and so much of this has to do with a perfect storm that without, you know, the whole story is really divine to me as I look back on it, because without several dominoes falling at the right time, Charlotte's Web really wouldn't be here. We went from a medical marijuana, a very strict regulated medical marijuana paradigm here in Colorado, where you had to have a camera viewing every plant. We had RFID tags on every plant and on every batch of everything as you drive through the process. Highly regulated, really difficult to scale. And we knew that these genetics going into Charlotte's Web were really hemp. They were really not marijuana, they were really hemp, but there were no hemp regulations. So we meet Charlotte February 2012. This waiting list grows. Sanjay Gupta tells the story. We have a waiting list of 15,000 people. Now thousands have moved to Colorado, but hemp's not legal. And we're looking at how to scale to take care of these people. So the perfect storm was Sanjay tells the story August 2013. And in November 2013, Colorado legalizes hemp. Not the federal government yet. So we were one of the first to apply for those hemp licenses and move these genetics into hemp, registered hemp with the Colorado Department of Agriculture versus the Marijuana Enforcement Division. And when you move into that kind of agriculture and you don't have to have an RFID tracking tag on everything, you're able to scale. So that was late 2013. Spring 2014, at the first possible moment, we hand planted with all these Charlotte's Web clones, the brothers and just a few employees. We had almost no money at this time. Hand planted our first 20-acre, to my knowledge, the first center pivot modern irrigation hemp field in the U.S. Ever, to my knowledge. This is spring 2014, the first time we could legally do this in Colorado and be in growing season. So, and in between Colorado legalizing and us planting that, what is that, February 2014, the first pilot program farm bill came out, right? So that perfect storm of legalization of these things allowed us, and then behind us, companies like us, to have an organization that was legal. And even though, you know, the FDA still isn't regulating the way that we would like them to, you know, we at least had some legal ground to stand on. And without that, we would have never scaled our operations to a level, you know, we'd probably still have a waiting list and people would still have to move to Colorado. So the legalization of hemp, I believe, really, you know, I know really saved a ton of lives and continues to improve a ton of others.
Yeah, it's funny, and this is how our paths crossed. You know, I got engaged in 2012, and we legalized hemp in Kentucky in 2013. I had no idea what CBD was, and I remember seeing that Sanjay Gupta special, and not putting two and two together, just saying, "Oh, this is a really lovely story," but that didn't have anything to do with what I was doing with hemp. And then we worked with McConnell to get the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, I should say, to get the 2014 language. And that's when we started learning about what you all were doing with hemp and CBD, and those three letters became overwhelmed my life after having no idea what CBD was at that point. And so it's one of these, as you called it, a perfect storm where a lot of coincidental things happen that have created this exciting industry, but we never would have seen this had it not been for your innovation and creativity and kind of bringing this all together.
Thank you, Jonathan. And, I remember those early days meeting you and having the opportunity to lobby with you, write things with you, as well as, you even introduced us to a host of farmers and helped us to get set up there in Kentucky. And it's interesting, all this work you were doing for seed and for fiber and for hemp for your neighbors there in Kentucky that really didn't have tobacco the same way that they always did. They needed a crop. You're doing this work for them. Mitch McConnell's doing this work for them. And really in the end, the way that I view it is you were doing this work for Charlotte and people like Charlotte and for the CBD industry. And you didn't know it. We all thought of hemp, fiber, and seed. And CBD is really what it's the shoulders of Charlotte and CBD that the hemp industry has been able to thrive on. And thank you for your early work.
Well, it is kind of it's both amusing and inspiring, and for those of us that believe in a higher power, spiritual. That I was working for 2 years on something that I did not know would help people that help little kids that were struggling with horrible illnesses, and that's something that really kind of made that effort worth it. And then by 2018, we recognized that we need to really make clear in the law that CBD's extracts, that hemp extracts, cannabinoids, and derivatives. We used 3 words for the 2018 Farm Bill that helped define CBD. Now, we still have the FDA to go, and that's the subject of other podcasts, but it really was a credit to kind of how you envision this, that we now have this industry. So talk about a little bit about, before we go, you've now moved to another innovative area that is in the healthcare space as well. What are you working on right now, Joel?
Yeah, so I'm sitting in my new office, the Stanley Brothers. We're serial entrepreneurs, and everything that we do is about botanical medicine. And what the cannabis plant taught us is how much nature and some of these botanics have for us that we've left behind. Almost all of our pharmaceuticals are now synthesized. They're single molecule, highly purified, which is a great option, but we've completely left behind plant medicine. And when you look at Charlotte's Web and Charlotte's story, that really marked the first time that anecdotally we saw a simple plant extract surpass the efficacy of multiple FDA-approved single molecule drugs for multiple disease states. That was the first time we've really seen that happen. And so we fell in love with botanical science. We fell in love with botanical medicine. And so this is Ajna Biosciences, AJNA. And it is focused on botanical drug development, which the FDA has a little known pathway for, where we can take plant extracts, we can standardize them like we learned to do over at Charlotte's Web. And I would say, Charlotte's Web Original Formula is one of the most standardized plant extracts in the world, not just hemp industry, but when you look at dietary supplements, you look at plant supplements, they're not very standardized. And standardization is really all that's needed to take a plant, show that it can be consistent through clinical trials, and then hopefully get that plant or its extract approved through the FDA so that insurance will eventually cover it and things like that. So that's what Ajna Biosciences is really about. And you'll love that we're starting our first botanic. It's not a plant, it's a fungi. We're starting with psilocybin. So we're looking at the psychedelics, predominantly for mental health, but also for neurological disorders. And I'm proud to say just a couple of weeks ago, the Stanleys through Ajna Biosciences received our first DEA Schedule I license. I never thought I would see that.
Wow. So we're actually DEA.
a few rooms over, we are cultivating, and our analytical chemists are setting up to start understanding now, just like we did with CBD and THC and cannabinoids back in the day. We're going to start understanding all of these molecules within the psilocybin mushroom, and we're doing it right now, completely federally, legally. So a lot has changed, and I like to think that Charlotte's story, the work you've done, the work we've done together, has moved the needle for plant medicines and some of these prohibited substances that now we live in a world where we're welcoming the research, where we're open to something that we used to call evil, like cannabis or mushrooms. We're open to that being helpful, and we're spending money on the research now. So this is a different world than when we met.
Yeah, now we met about 8 years ago, Joel, and if you had told me that you would be working arm in arm with the Drug Enforcement Administration, I would have laughed. But
Me too.
Things do change, and you've taken something that was just a dream into a real reality, and it's helped millions of people, and I can only imagine what you're going to be doing in the psychedelic space as well. Our listeners will stay tuned. But anyway, Joel Stanley, thank you for joining us on Hemp Legally Speaking. And to all our listeners, please join us for in a couple more weeks for our next episode as we explore the law, the history, and the sciences behind hemp and CBD.